In this video I will use props to demonstrate the artificial swarm technique, which is a way to work with the bee's natural swarming instinct without losing the swarm. This is usually part of the swarm control segment of a beginner's beekeeping course, but this is on hold due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, the bees don't care about our problems and will be preparing to swarm regardless. Any students who already have bees need to get on top of this subject ASAP, otherwise their queen and half their workforce will soon be setting up home in a neighbour's chimney. Remember, if you ask 3 beekeepers you'll get 4 opinions, so if you see other versions of the artificial swarm, it's up to you to pick the advice you like. So these are the props. This is your hive represented by a shoebox, and flying out from the hive are the mature foraging bees represented by these little fellas, and inside the hive the young bees are looking after the brood, represented by me looking after my nephew Oliver. There we go. And we also have a queen represented by Celeste, the burlesque pig. Now, you're inspecting your hive, your brood box once a week. Everything's going fine, but then you find the dreaded queen cells represented by these yogurt pots. You now have to act immediately. Depending on how far along the queen cells are, your bees could be out of the box and into your neighbour's chimney within the next couple of days. So what do you do? In order to do an artificial swarm, you need to have a spare hive and you must be able to find your queen. Now, the first thing you do is you move your swarming colony to a new stand 3 foot or so away from the original location, like this. And then you put a new empty hive on the original location. Now you find your queen and you take a small amount of brood, represented by Ollie again, and you put the queen and the brood into the new box. Then you share out the food. If you've got 2 supers, obviously that's a no-brainer. If you've only got 1 super, you probably want to give it to this box because this brood box will have stores in it anyway. If you don't have any supers at all, then you will need to share out frames of food between the 2 boxes. So initially most of the bees are over here. However, after a day or so of good weather, the foraging bees will have migrated back to the original site, and the reason for that is the way the bees navigate. They don't see their hive from a distance and fly towards it. They use the lay of the land, trees and houses and fences and such, as a map, and they fly to within a few inches of the front of the hive and then just fly in. So these bees came out of here, did their foraging, and when they came back they used their map and ended up here on the original site. So in its simplest form, that is the artificial swarm technique. This is the artificial swarm. It contains very little brood, an old queen and old bees. So as far as the bees are concerned, it looks a bit like a swarm that's set up shop in a new location. So hopefully they'll settle down and build up the colony. Meanwhile, your original brood box doesn't have a queen. It's got queen cells and it's only got young bees and brood in it. So as far as they're concerned, it looks a bit like a colony that's lost a swarm. So hopefully the virgin queens will fight it out amongst themselves and you'll end up with a single queen left who will take over the running of this colony. However, the bees haven't read the books and they may decide to go their own way. Even if they do behave as expected, things may still go wrong. So, what can go wrong with the brood box? You will probably have quite a few queen cells, and what you hope is that the queens will fight it out amongst themselves and you'll have one left to build up the colony. However, the workers may protect the queen cells so that the first queen out then swarms with half the remaining bees, and then the next queen out swarms with half of what's left, and the whole thing can swarm itself to death. So beekeepers generally reduce the number of queen cells in the hive, and then they mark the frames with the queen cells they've chosen with drawing pins so they're easy to find. You come back a week later, your brood box probably had eggs in it, so the workers may have started extra queen cells, so you knock those down as well. Now, there's a certain amount of disagreement amongst beekeepers as to how many queen cells to leave. If you knock right down to one queen cell, there's a danger that it won't be viable. As a rough rule of thumb, maybe 1 in 3 queen cells is a dud. On the other hand, if you leave, say, a couple for safety purposes, there's the swarming problem to worry about. So what I do when I come back after a week is make sure that the queens have both emerged from the 2 cells that I've left them. If the workers are protecting the queen, she'll still be in the cell, so you pop the lid off and let her out. Now, this guy, Ron Brown, is of the belief that so long as the queens are running around in the box, they will fight it out amongst themselves and you won't get swarming problem. So that's the tack I take. So assuming you've got a single queen running around in the box, she'll take about a week to get up to strength, and then she needs to mate within 3 weeks, otherwise she won't mate. So you've got roughly a month to wait, at which time you should start to see evidence of a laying queen in your box. If the queen goes out and doesn't come back, say she gets lost or she's eaten by a bird, then this will eventually collapse. Or if the weather's bad and she can't mate, then you'll eventually have a drone laying queen. So to improve my chances, when I'm doing my artificial swarm, I divide the brood box into 2 separate nucleus boxes. So then I have 2 smaller colonies, and I hope to increase my chances of getting a laying queen at the end of it. And then if I end up with 2 viable colonies, that's no tragedy. So what can go wrong with the artificial swarm? Possibly they'll be so keyed up to swarm that they'll up and go anyway. We have left them with a small amount of brood, which we hope will keep their interest. Some people might put a queen excluder underneath the brood box for a few days in order to make sure they stay. I haven't bothered with that personally. Now, it may be that there's something wrong with the queen, and the reason why they were making queen cells is because they need to get shot of her, in which case after a short while you'll start to see more queen cells appearing, or they may just be such a swarmy stock that they're absolutely determined to go. So you may start to see queen cells appearing in here again. You can knock them down in the hope that they'll get their act together, but eventually you'll get to the point where this lot just simply will refuse to stay in the box, in which case you probably want to cull the queen. Then you treat this the same way that you were treating the original brood box, knock down to 1 or 2 queen cells and so on and so forth, and hope that they produce a new viable queen of their own. On the other hand, if things settle down for a decent period and then you start to see maybe a few queen cells appearing in here, maybe nearer to the middle of the frame rather than the edges, what's actually happening is that they are now trying to supersede the queen. They've swarmed, they know their queen's old, they set up shop, and then they replace her in situ rather than swarming out. So it always becomes a bit of a judgment call as to exactly whether it's going to be an attempt at swarming or attempt at supersedure. So fingers crossed, really. Of course, the first issue you might run into is that the bees had already swarmed before you had a chance to do the artificial swarm. You may have missed an inspection, or maybe they had a few queen cells hidden away that you didn't notice. So you open up the box, it seems to be rather more empty than you remember, and there are sealed queen cells dotted about the place. So the swarm's already gone. All you can do is deal with the brood box in the way that you would have done if you'd done the artificial swarm. That is, you knock down queen cells to your preferred number and hope that they raise a new queen. So finally, let's assume everything has gone more or less to plan and you have two viable colonies. You've got your old queen working away in this box, and you've got a new laying queen in this box. And you haven't lost any of your bees, and you haven't annoyed any of your neighbours by giving them bees they didn't want. Now you have options. If you want two colonies, you've got two colonies and you're sorted. On the other hand, if you've got enough colonies, you can unite the two hives back together again. So you may ask, what would that accomplish? We had a box, it swarmed, now we've got a box. What's to stop it swarming again? Well, nothing. But the situation has changed a great deal since the swarming started. First of all, it's taken at least a month for all this to happen, so the weather and the available forage and so on is all different. Secondly, you now have a young queen, and young queens are less likely to swarm. So if you want to unite the two hives back together again, I'm afraid you have to lose your mature queen, and then you can unite the boxes back together again, which is stuff that's covered in the literature. Generally speaking, you put one box on top of the other with a sheet of newspaper in between, so that the bees will unite peacefully rather than fighting each other to death. And there you go. Good luck.